the floor today to celebrate what we say annually is Sunshine Week, a very important week in our system of self-government. For the last 17 years, advocacy groups, good government watchdogs, media organizations, and many members of this body have joined forces to observe the importance of transparency in government and freedom of information. As a longtime champion for open, accessible government, I speak today in support of what we all ought to consider enduring principles. Sunshine Week coincides each year with March 16th. That's the day one of our nation's founding fathers and fourth President of the United States, James Madison, was born. Madison is widely known as the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. From his writings, particularly in the Federalist Papers, you might say he was the architect who framed our system of checks and balances. Madison believed all powers of the government are derived of, by, and for the people. And that's what brings me to the floor today, Madam President. The public has a right to know what their government is doing and how it's spending tax dollars. There's very few things in government that should be kept secret. National security, so we don't tell our enemies what we're going to do, privacy of American citizens, and some intelligence gathering information. I'll bet that's 1% of everything the government's involved in. And yet, there's some people think that a lot more ought to be classified or secret, et cetera, et cetera. So we have the Freedom of Information Act, that is to protect the public's right to know. Through Freedom of Information Act request, every day Americans can ask a federal agency for information. Unfortunately now, and it's a growing problem, federal agencies seem to have the unstated goal of releasing as little information as possible to the public. Agencies rely on exemptions to FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to withhold information. A 2021 Government Accountability Office study found this, that federal agencies use FOIA exemptions to avoid disclosing documents. That problem has doubled between 2012 and 2019. Most Americans may not be familiar with a section of the code that we call B3 FOIA exemption, and they don't, of course, they don't have to be aware of this, but they should know that it's the most used justification by the federal government to withhold information from the public. The increase in the use of this FOIA exemption to withhold information from the public is unacceptable to me, and it ought to be unacceptable to anybody that believes we should not have secrecy in government. In another recent report, the Government Accountability Office found that FOIA requests, backlogs, increased by nearly 20% in just the 1 year, 2019 to 2020. In fact, backlogged FOIA requests are up 97% since 2012. 16 federal agencies had more than 1,000 backlogged FOIA requests. They account for 91% of backlog requests across the entire government. Federal agencies ought to do better, must do better, and we must all work to ensure that they're responding appropriately and within a reasonable time for FOIA requests. Congressional oversight is part of our constitutional assignment to protect the power of the purse and ensure laws are faithfully enforced. Finally, we must acknowledge the important role that citizens who bravely come forward, often at great professional risk, to report wrongdoing in our efforts to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. I've often said that whistleblowers are the best line of defense against government waste. No one shines a brighter light on waste, fraud, and abuse than whistleblowers. And why might that be? Because they're down in the bowels of the government where maybe the heads of the agencies don't know something wrong's going on, and they're able to point it out. The whistleblowers are. That's why I introduced this Congress to strengthen the False Claims Act. I got the False Claims Act passed in 1986. Since then, that act helped government recover $70 billion in fraud. And last year, I asked the Department of Veterans Affairs about allegations that VA employees leaked potentially market-sensitive information, and then you know what they did? They retaliated against these whistleblowers. Nearly 1 year later, I haven't received any answers, and I assume I'm not going to receive any answers because it's an embarrassment to the VA. As a co-founder and co-chairman of the Whistleblowers Protection Caucus, I lead efforts from Capitol Hill to strengthen protections and raise awareness for what often is an uphill battle for whistleblowers. I want you to know how I feel whistleblowers are treated by their very own government, how they're treated just because they want the government to do what the government is supposed to be doing under the laws, and they want the money spent the way the Congress intends for the money spent. These whistleblowers that point out that wrongdoing are treated by the bureaucracy like skunks at a picnic. This U.S. Senator will continue shining spotlight on waste, fraud, and abuse at the Pentagon, and I'm going to do it elsewhere as well. I will continue advocating for whistleblowers with every tool at my disposal. And as an Iowa farmer, I know why farmers make hay when the sun shines. And that's a good lesson for good government. Sunshine helps hold government accountable to the people. And let me repeat again, accountability transparency brings accountability.